lunch maybe here, and today I wanted to briefly talk about a recommendation I want to make, an audiobook. It's called NPCs by Drew Hayes. This book is, to put it briefly, imagine if a DM is telling you, and DM being a dungeon master, person who is crafting the narrative, in this case the author, how very self-aware. Imagine if a DM is telling you a story or watching you reading a let's play of a character in your favorite game. So personally, when it comes to lit RPGs, it's sort of one of those sub-genres that I try to get into, and most of the time I cannot. But there are exceptions, and this is an exception. Usually what I seek from any type of book is a skilled author to put a unique spin on it. A few months ago, I think 2 months ago, I reviewed The Aching God, the debut by Mike Shell, which is very much a tabletop-inspired game. And Mike Shell is a former game designer in that field, but he took the lessons that he learned in world building and crafting a believable setting, and he populated this setting with fleshed out characters that feel and think and behave like real people. And oftentimes in lit RPG, that's not always the case, which is not to say that it's a bad thing. Sometimes you just want to go along with the ride, but for the most part, I seek out something more. Usually I'm not the biggest fan, but Drew Hayes did just that. He actually, I think, even cheated a bit, and by cheated, I mean he channeled his inner Terry Pratchett here, because he wrote a humorous take on a D&D novel, which I think in this very specific case really gets you a free pass, because usually humor is very, very difficult to write. It's like when you look at the movies. Me personally, just a plain old comedy, nothing but a comedy, does not hold my attention very long. But if you combine humor with any other subgenre, even with horror or fantasy or sci-fi, action, especially action, anything at all, they both work really well, both of the elements. They kind of bounce off of each other, just like the characters do. And, well, this audiobook, because I did consume it as an audiobook, and I want to recommend it as an audiobook because it is really, really well done. What it is you have a meta-narrative framing. A tabletop RPG session is being played, and their dungeon master, unlike players, of course, is a person who weaves the narrative, gives various choices to the players, and this game here is conveniently called Spell, Sword and Shield. So, as to cheekily avoid any kind of infringement. So, and the group of adventurers played by this group is almost immediately killed at the inn when most of these D&D type of adventures start. And they're killed in a very humorous fashion by eating some bad mushrooms. Now, this is not a spoiler. This happens literally at the very beginning. This is all a premise. So we have an imaginary world called Maplebark. And the inn in which our unfortunate players met their demise is owned by a grumpy half-orc Grumpf, who I love, his friend Tistel, who is a former henchman. Henchmen are like, henchmen of minions of bad guys, let's say. A human guard named Eric, and his friend and mayor's daughter called Gabrielle, who is this you would think is a damsel in distress type of person, but she's kind of the opposite. She is someone who is sick of constantly being abducted and then rescued by the adventurers. And so, what is the driving force of humor here? Driving force of humor is, so the adventurers died in the inn of our friend the Grump the half-orc. And the characters I just listed, they find out in the letter that the adventurers had that the adventurers were on an important mission. They were summoned by the Mad King. And immediately a paranoia strikes. What will they do? What will King do if he finds out that people who were on an important mission were killed in this lowly village in the middle of nowhere? Of course, he will raise everything. So they see no other exit than to assume identities of the fallen heroes. Hilarity ensues. I won't go into plot any more deeply because actually, you know what, the plot even isn't the point. Remember how I said that Drew Hayes cheated a bit here? The framework of the story, it's just an excuse to have a somewhat stereotypical stroll through the fantasy land, but the meta elements, because remember, this is not a fantasy novel in a stereotypical way. There are elements of real world here. So the meta elements pop up from time to time. And the main question behind these meta elements is what happens to the world if the NPCs, these particular NPCs, have their own agency to act? And we learn that the characters actually do know that something's off about this world. Nobody knows why, but there are correlations. There are some conclusions that characters inadvertently come to. For example, why the number of beasts and monsters increase with the increase of adventurers. They also know that in some ways, on some level, there's something off about these adventurers. And now these adventurers look just like anyone else. They are not different race, nothing like that. They're dressed like everyone else. But there's something off. So let's answer the question, which is, where does the fun come from here? This is a short 7-hour audiobook. The audiobook narrator is great. His name is Roger Wayne. He's terrific. This is the first time I'm listening to his narration, and I should be on the lookout on more of his books. But the fun. The characters are very charming because, again, Hayes is a cheeky man. He does the oldest trick in the book by subverting expectations, which is what all great comedy does, right? So we have Grump, the half-orc. He's a half-orc, an orc of few words, but because he's a barkeep who needs to keep track and remember a lot of lists in his head, like what to order, what stocks to refuel, and so on. He is the one who is uncharacteristically best suited for a wizard, because being a wizard consists of remembering long litanies of spells and magic formulas and so on, which is hilarious. Then we have Eric, who is a guard, who he's best friends with the mayor's daughter, who keeps getting abducted. And in order to be a better guard, he spent a lifetime studying the traps that goblins and enemies set in order to outmaneuver them, to stop them, to abduct his friend, which in fact gives him a perfect set of skills to, during the story, become a perfect thief, not a warrior. Then we have Gabrielle, who is a mayor's daughter. Like I said, she keeps getting abducted. And she insists on carrying a bow. But after years of being abducted by goblins, she has some unrelenting, unresolved rage issues. So she becomes the party's warrior, berserker character. And then, well, last member of the party, who is probably my favorite character, and he is in some ways probably a self-insert character of the novel. He is a wise gnome. He's a former henchman of various bad guys, but he knows how the lairs are built, the traps, how the traps are set. And I don't want to spoil anything because his character goes through a lot, but it's all fun. And I wanted to quote one passage just to indicate the type of humor we're dealing with here. This is a quote by the henchman character after a particularly nasty encounter. So, his words rang true, truer than they'd been intended, likely. And the others had to admit that the constant threat of death was such a persistent companion, it almost felt like they should get it a horse. So this type of gentle gallows humor, if you will. Not to say that the prose is perfect. There are some clunky passages, I think, which is why I absolutely recommend this in audio form. I did check out for this review the ebook form, and I gotta say, some things really are better when they are performed by a narrator. A narrator is able to smooth over some of the things that just jump out at you, because there are some really clunky passages of purple prose. There's this one description of an evil wizard that I don't think was meant to be funny. Maybe it was, maybe I'm just dense, but it went something like, his pools of dark resourcefulness were whirling, something along those lines. And it was just very cringy. So, to conclude, this was a delightful listen, and I do intend to listen sequels in the future. I think there are a total of 5 now, or 4. And I recommend this to everyone who enjoys a fun, clever, reminiscent of Terry Pratchett romp. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.